I'm pretty sure everybody was shocked when Matt Gaetz had to withdraw his own nomination request for Attorney General of the United States. And to be clear, there's a conspiracy that goes back about a good 14 years and spans a few different countries, 3 or 4 presidential administrations, and covers tens of millions of dollars behind the conspiracy having to do with Matt Gaetz and this whole scandal in the first place. So let's see what actually happened with Matt, as obviously when you have a president that won the popular vote, got about 50% of it, in fact, and then also has a majority in the Senate that is effectively 54 once you count J.D. Vance's tiebreaker, it really makes you question, okay, why the hell don't the Republicans, that, by the way, owe Donald Trump for them winning in the first place, to have their seats, why are so many Republicans in the establishment fearing a Matt Gaetz attorney generalship? But also, why did so many of them cower at the moment when Trump would need them most? Let's get right into it. So, as we all know, the mainstream media have been running around basically slandering, in my opinion, the congressman out of Florida. Okay, Matt Gaetz is being slandered as somebody who is a predator, somebody who is on a registry, basically. You know what I'm insinuating? A guy who goes for teeny boppers and whatnot. But let's actually explain why these sort of lies are coming out and why these are fake. Okay, so first and foremost, we have to cover one of the major associates of Matt Gaetz from years ago. We're going to talk about Joel Greenberg, okay? Now, Joel Greenberg was a tax collector out of Florida at the state level, of course, in 2019, okay? This guy is one of these very spoiled brats, kind of like a Hunter Biden type. Okay, just think about it that way. So Joel Greenberg is interesting because he is basically the reason why Matt Gaetz got screwed over. And again, Matt is no angel. Is Matt like some sort of like frat guy going on 20 years of being out of college? Is that like the sort of guy he is? Probably, but is a frat guy really a predator? Actually, yes, some of them are, but not him, okay? I'm talking about just generally sleeping around and whatnot, okay? Plenty of politicians do this. Doesn't make him better than anyone, clearly doesn't, but he's not this evil person. But anyway, Greenberg in this case, though, was a classic rich kid. He had a rich father, of course. And so there were rumors in Seminole County, where he was working, of course, that it was a wash by 2019 with federal investigation going into a crypto scam that he used tax collector dollars from. So basically, he used the taxpayer funds for a crypto scam. He was also accused of using the Amex card he got from the state to spend $70,000 on prostitutes from a sugar daddy site. Keep in mind that virtually almost all the evidence against Matt Gaetz is from Joel Greenberg being the guy that ratted Matt out, okay? So this is why we're calling into question the history of a guy you've never heard of, okay? So Greenberg was going against another guy who was a local music teacher running for, I think, tax collector in Florida. So in around 2020, Brian Butte threw his hat in the ring in the primary as a Republican. So despite Greenberg having already the advantage of the incumbency, which is huge, obviously down ballot, you don't even know who most of the people are when you vote. He has money. He had name recognition, of course. But Greenberg's significant criminal activity as the tax collector of the state likely contributed to an obsession over destroying this other candidate, Butte, publicly but also privately. So this guy, who, again, is the one that's ratting out Gaetz, basically spent about 2 years going over and stalking his primary opponent. He would obviously make up fake allegations about him, but he would also create fake Facebook accounts to pretend to be students of the music teacher running against him in the primary, accusing him of being a pervert, and you know what, insinuations come from that chat. So anyway, so he's straight up just making up fake accounts, making up fake SA allegations to ruin the reputation of a guy running as a fellow Republican in the same state. And so this is the sort of character we have. Also keep in mind, the tax collector position in Florida also allows you to you are responsible for giving people their driver's license, producing IDs. So basically, he had the ability and the privilege to make fake IDs that were valid, even if the police checked it, pretty much. And so this will go into later. Okay, so keep in mind, I just told you that. No, this Joel Greenberg guy that's writing out Gaetz is such a rat that he would even mail handwritten letters to administrators at the school that the music teacher taught at, accusing him of sexually abusing his own students, okay? Abusing his own students. Again, completely made up. He would just do that just because he wanted the guy to fail. Now, the guy's an idiot, and apparently his DNA and fingerprints were lifted from them, and he was arrested in June of 2020. And he was charged by the Department of Justice, in fact, with stalking, okay? Now, keep in mind, everybody says Matt Gaetz, 17-year-old, 17-year-old. Okay, well, maybe we're onto something because apparently in the fall of 2017, so again, this was 7 years ago, Greenberg and then a 17-year-old girl were discussing, among other things, their escapades around Florida and beyond. Further investigation revealed that from December of 2016 through 18, Joel Greenberg was a customer on a sugar daddy website where he solicited various women for escort services, and there he met the girl. Now, the formal legal documents say this. The minor had an account on this website in which the minor represented herself as an adult. Greenberg then asked for the girl's Snapchat, in which case they were contacting each other and they met up, okay? So think about that. The allegation, and maybe I'm wrong, but I'm probably not, okay? Matt Gaetz is a you know what because he might have done something with a 17-year-old. No evidence, by the way. The Biden DOJ dropped the charges against Matt Gaetz, or they didn't even pursue them because there's no evidence. But anyway, the mainstream media, especially the people on The View, those types, God, they're annoying. They're saying that Matt Gaetz did X and Y with the 17-year-old, but it turns out that it was the friend who even he was lied to about the girl being an adult in the first place. So it's basically like 3 degrees of separation between Matt being a bad guy, if you want to say that, and this obviously being the case. Now, major wrinkle in the story, by the way. Okay, so Greenberg had not only created multiple false Florida State ID cards for himself, but also created a fake ID for his underage lover after finding out that she had been lying to him about her age. And this is where Matt Gaetz comes into the story. So you see how this is heading into a place where Matt Gaetz, at worst, would have slept with the girl that had a fake ID saying she was an adult, and it turns out she was 17. Okay, that's the worst case scenario, by the way. So the guy didn't even know she was underage, and she had a legitimate ID, not even a fake. I'm in college. Plenty of people have fake IDs. They pay pretty good amounts of money for those, okay? But this was a legitimate state ID, which is super rare, of course, to have a legitimate fake. Just so happens that the guy that gave the girl the ID was a tax collector. So again, very, very, very niche reference I make there, but still. So this is the allegation against Matt Gaetz. Now, when you look at the case of Joel Greenberg, he was clearly a loser, a guy who would use government money to pay for sugar babies, a guy who would hook up with girls that were, pretty young. I'm assuming he was a guy in his mid-30s hooking up with 20-year-olds, 19, 18, 17. Like, again, the guy is not a venerable person. Totally, yeah, lock him up. I don't care. But Joel Greenberg is important to the story, of course. And again, I would never waste your time. He apparently is somebody who would rat out Matt Gaetz, who has clout from being in Congress, of course, to then get himself out of prison. Now, we know the story all too well. Us non-felons, of course, read it in stories, but also in movies, where, of course, one person snitches out his friends to, basically exonerate or help himself out and lower his prison sentence. So in this case, there's very loose evidence. For example, Joel Greenberg, 7 years ago, had a picture with him and Matt Gaetz, Roger Stone, okay? That's apparently enough to implicate Matt Gaetz. You see how slanted and biased this whole thing is? Now, when you look at it, though, you'll see. So apparently, purportedly, Greenberg's lawyer approached Bill Barr, again, Donald Trump's Attorney General's Department of Justice, with a proposition. He claimed he could provide evidence that a sitting Congressman, Gaetz, had engaged with acts with a minor. Bill Barr's DOJ then proceeded to open a secret investigation into the allegations, which remained a secret until it was leaked to the New York Times. So you see the liberal angle right here. It gets leaked March 30th, 2021. So interesting. So when Trump's out of office, the Biden DOJ basically obviously has the files from the last admin, more or less. And they're like, oh wow, there's a Matt Gaetz thing in here. Whoop, okay, let's give it to the media and see what it does. Okay, so you see how the fix is already in. And this is why my channel is so niche but so great. And again, I have a big ego, but it's true because who else would have known this? This is crazy. Now, the next part of the story is pretty complicated. So about 3 years ago, of course, the New York Times leaks this big amount of data on Matt Gaetz. Now, Matt Gaetz gets interviewed by Tucker Carlson on these allegations. And It was a pretty awkward interview. I'm going to save you the time of watching the whole thing. But basically, Matt Gaetz is kind of reading off of prepared statements, which in and of itself is kind of disconcerting when you're talking about allegations of the sort of like, implicating yourself with minors and everything like that. So it comes off kind of like dejected and also kind of creepy. But it turns out he was kind of vindicated. Now, in this interview, he talks about how he had his father was, and his father's name is Don, ironically. Okay, so his father, Don, was extorted for the tune of about $25 million, saying that, if you do not give us X and Y, then we're not going to let your son get away with this sort of allegation. Now, this extortion is interesting because Matt Gaetz specifically calls out a guy, I think his name is Dan McGee, who is somebody implicated in Florida politics, whom is purported to be someone who's trying to angle against the Gaetz to extort them for money to then pay for the FBI to get some of their, federal government agents back from Iran. Now, that sounds completely insane, but we do have some writing to cover it. So the guy in question named by Gaetz was David L. McGee. So pretty old lawyer, or otherwise somebody you would think is not really going to do some big conspiracy. But here we go. So, Bob Levinson, now this is very obscure and this is very in the weeds. So, Bob Levinson apparently was a man in Iran. The official story is that he was a retired FBI agent who was contracted by a semi-off-the-books CIA unit to then run a covert operation in Iran. He was kidnapped from Kish Island following a meeting with an American fugitive living in Iran that had been arranged by a former NBC producer named Ira Silverman. So Levinson was then kidnapped in March of 2007. George Bush actually acknowledged the disappearance in June of 2007 as apparently, in quote, concerning. However, no one from the federal government will admit Levinson worked for the CIA. So think about this. The CIA, as we all know, and the FBI, but namely, again, the CIA has a black fund, and that dark fund has millions, if not billions of dollars that goes to different things that people in the American public don't have access to. So whether that be color revolutions in Ukraine like in 2014, or in other cases where they assassinate someone or otherwise have spies in different countries, we all know this to be vaguely the case, but this might be an example that's pretty specific that actually ties in Gaetz somehow. Anyway, now this is a picture of Bob Levinson, 2011. So basically, this is somewhat hard to explain, but the FBI and CIA want to get whatever spies that get captured in another country back for obvious reasons. But they can't really use the federal government completely to help them because then they would concede that they have secret spies. So they need roundabout ways to get their people back. Now, how do they do this? Well, the black budget can only go so much. I mean, if we're spending, let's say, $100 billion on the FBI, people are going to start thinking, well, what the hell? Where's the money going? So then at that point, it just begs an audit. So to avoid that, they'll try to get funds from other people. Now, to get funds from other people, they need to probably, blackmail billionaires and millionaires. Well, guess so what is the case? Well, it turns out Don Gaetz, Matt's father, is a multi-millionaire. And it also turns out that they used him for leverage. Now, when you look down here, okay, now to get to the point of the video. On March 16th of 2021, Don Gaetz receives a message from somebody in the deep state about a grand plan. The plan was that in exchange for Don Gaetz fronting a rescue mission for Bob Levinson in the tune of about $25 million. Unnamed agents with influential contacts in the Biden administration at the time would convince the president to give Matt Gaetz a full presidential pardon on his looming trafficking charges. The price, obviously, is already over here on the screen. Now, to go further into this, naturally, Gaetz was incredulous. Okay, so obviously Don Gaetz didn't hear about any sort of escapade with Matt, and so therefore he's like, okay, okay, I'm getting blackmailed and/or extorted for what reason? So then Don calls his son who immediately told him to contact the local FBI office. The FBI then tells Don, the father, to meet with David McGee wearing a wire. Don then agrees to that. However, just before the meeting, Don requested a written acknowledgement from the FBI on the purpose of the investigation in the meeting, and he was worried that something had been that could be used against him had he said something off in that sort of meeting against Matt Gaetz in that case, and he still didn't even know anything about the case, of course, and so the FBI was reluctant, though they eventually agreed. And so think about that. The FBI/CIA wanted money that could be off the books, and they do this via, in this case, extortion, apparently, allegedly, So they used Don Gaetz for money, and they have some sort of like vague link to a congressman, Matt Gaetz, who has a rich father in Don, because Matt was friends with a guy named Joel Greenberg, and Joel Greenberg obviously had the whole tie with the all the sugar babies, and then one of them that happened to be 17 but then lied about her age. So then after he figured that out, he then gave her a fake legitimate ID, if you know what I mean. Like he could make official IDs even though in bad faith. And then Matt probably did not know the girl was 17. And so this is where the whole ratting out Matt Gaetz part actually coalesces. Now, coincidentally, the day after the FBI agrees that they're going to give a notary or an official paper, basically saying that, okay, Don, like, okay, you're going to have a wire for this meeting with McGee, and we're going to say that you're not doing something fishy. This is for X and Y. Once they agree to that, the next day, again, coincidence. Okay, this is not a big conspiracy, folks, by the way. I'm being sarcastic. Okay, the New York Times the next day ran a leak about the DOJ's apparent case against Gaetz. Again, this case was dropped in 22, but earlier in 21, the New York Times pretends like it's going to be this full-fledged thing against Gaetz. Now, it was dropped for a couple different reasons. First of which, it obviously wasn't true enough to even have proof to make it stick. And so, again, when the Biden DOJ drops a case against Matt Gaetz, you could probably assume he's innocent. But anyway, so here's one theory. The FBI might have planned to use Don Gaetz' meeting where he was wearing a wire with McGee, who's the guy who was extorting Don for the money against Matt. They could have thought that maybe Don would have said something that would have gotten Matt in trouble and then use that as leverage against the family to then extort them for money, to then get the apparent and alleged FBI agent or whatever, Bob Levinson from Iran, back. Okay, you see what I'm saying? Again, super convoluted, but you're here with me today. Anyway, so the immunity demand basically quashed that even working out for the deep state. So then they leaked this story to the New York Times, but then they also buried the wiretaps. So think about that. Part of the reason why they didn't investigate Matt Gaetz even further and they dropped the charges was because had they actually done that, the defense maybe, and again, maybe I want to be a lawyer next year or I want to go to law school next year, so I'm kind of iffy on the details, but basically, had they actually drawn this out against Matt Gaetz, they would have probably had to release the wiretaps involving his father and McGee, and that that sort of recording probably would have hurt their case, obviously, because what they were talking about would have implicated the whole thing about the prisoner transfer with Iran and millions of dollars in blackmail, and then any middle American would have been like, what the hell is my government doing with my money? Or even if they're not using my taxpayer money, why the hell do we have spies in Iran? And then secondly, why are we getting some random millionaire to then like pay off Iranian hostage holders? Anyway, right. Now, to add a little bit of validity to this article, by the way, by Uncover DC, give them credit, you'll see that apparently you have Scott Adams, who is the guy who made Dilbert. Okay, he's a pretty big right-wing personality on Twitter, or X, as we call it today. We do have some circumstantial evidence by a person named Jake Novak, who purportedly was working with the Israeli consulate as being their media director. So you have a lot of stuff that even before all the drops came, obviously he had a source, this Israeli person did, and then told it to Scott Adams, and then Scott Adams lit him up with it. And so the point being is that, obviously a lot of this is legit. And so even if half of what I've said this video is even true, it kind of throws away this whole issue of, oh my God, Matt Gaetz is like this evil pariah. It's just not the case. Now, this Jacob Novak person from the Israeli consulate was not pro Matt Gaetz, okay? Now, if you look at it here, he even admits to most of what I have been saying in this video. He says, the real documents do not extort, and we only asked for 25 million as an estimate at first, but we came way down. So think about that. The whole point is you extorted the guy's dad over fake charges of trafficking. And the guy says, well, yeah, we said 25 million at first, but we lowered it, okay? So it's okay. It's like, no, dude, you still... Like, that doesn't change it. Imagine if you were to say, hey, you tried to extort me because you kidnapped my son and the ransom was 20 million. And they're like, well, we said 20, but we lowered it to 5. It's like, okay, well, you're still scum. Like, what the hell is this? So, again, I'm not God. I don't know exactly what happened with Matt Gaetz, but this is a pretty big chunk of data that I cannot ignore. Now, to somewhat wrap things up here, as this is pretty long-winded, but I hope you guys enjoyed the sort of nuance. Anyway, so to wrap this up, Joel Greenberg, again, the whole spoiled rich kid tax collector of Florida, who apparently was nothing more than a a Hunter Biden ripoff. He pleaded guilty to trafficking, identity fraud, wire fraud, and a host of other charges in May of 2021. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison, with 10 of the 11 coming from a mandatory minimum imposed by the trafficking charge. Now, the DOJ did not close its case against Gaetz until October of 22. They never also publicly acknowledged why he wasn't charged, which they should, obviously. Although it became pretty obvious once you learned that Joel Greenberg produced fake IDs for the underage girl in question. How can you convict someone of, what I have on the screen here? Why would you convict someone of this when this woman was using an actual state of Florida ID and driver's license to be present as being of age? So anyway, folks, that's basically it. Matt Gaetz was shot down by a group of people, including but not limited to Murkowski in Alaska, Collins in Maine, and a lot of other senators probably, that behind the scenes told J.D. Vance, Matt Gaetz, and Donald Trump that, hey, we will not vote for your nominee, despite the fact that the guy won elected office in Congress already, despite this being a looming scandal, okay, in 2022. And we're also going to ignore the fact that, hey, you, Donald Trump, you won the popular vote. You have a mandate to appoint the people you want. But these cowards and rhinos use this whole scandal as a pretext to shoot down his nomination. And to that, I gotta say, okay, Matt Gaetz is probably mostly innocent. Again, I'm not saying Matt Gaetz is a Mormon. I'm not saying the guy's a complete Amish prude. No, he is not completely clean as a person, but he's not any worse than the median politician or even the given intern, okay? I mean, seriously, a frat guy right now probably has a worse rap sheet than Matt Gaetz. And so, to be clear, worst case scenario is that Matt Gaetz slept with a lot of girls, and one of them was 17, and she had a legitimate ID that said she was an adult. So he had no idea. That's the worst case scenario. Maybe he didn't even do that, even. But anyway, so I'm a little upset. He seems to be largely innocent, and so at least you guys know why the nomination of Matt Gaetz for Attorney General did not pan out the way that we probably would have liked. But anyway, like the video if you liked it. If you learned something new, like the video, of course. Subscribe if you want more content like this, and comment down below if you have any ideas, suggestions, or any sort of commentary as to what I should do next. And I'll see y'all in the next one. Adios.